With all due respect, I'd like your nomination. When will we see it?
There has not a single admiral or any military official has turned down a position that's been
So when will we see
provided.
your nominee for the Chief of Naval Operations?
In due time, for all the right reasons.
Again, I think we've seen the managerial incompetence. Okay, let's move on to budgetary incompetence. You missed the deadline to submit a draft defense budget to Congress, which makes it impossible for us to complete our work on the NDAA or appropriations, and makes it more likely you'll receive delays in funding you need for new acquisitions, programs, and other priorities.
En medio del caos en el Medio Oriente. Hablamos de conflictos muy graves, decisiones urgentes en lo que es política exterior. Un mundo que está observando a Estados Unidos con mucha preocupación. Al parecer, Donald Trump está más preocupado por otra cosa. ¿Qué es lo que tiene realmente indignado al mandatario? Hablamos del desfile militar del cumpleaños, que fue un fracaso. Así, señores, al parecer su obsesión no es la paz mundial, tampoco es el bienestar del pueblo, no es el rol de los Estados Unidos en el escenario internacional. No, amigos, está muy furioso porque su desfile fue muy festivo. Y eso, mis amigos, lo dice todo. Sean bienvenidos a Políticamente Desacuerdo. Señores, hoy veremos cómo Donald Trump ha atacado a Hegseth, lo ha regañado por el tema del desfile vacío en una llamada filtrada. Así que los invito a que se queden hasta el final de este video porque les traigo los detalles y las noticias más interesantes de hoy. Bueno, señores, vamos a empezar por este personaje clave en esta historia que es muy ridícula, y es Pete Hegseth, el secretario de Defensa. Ya de por sí es alguien sin experiencia real para el cargo, pero al parecer lo que colmó la paciencia de Trump no es su falta de preparación ante una crisis global, sino que fue su cumpleaños número 79. Al parecer no tuvo el tono correcto que le esperaba. Lo que más le molesta al presidente es que su desfile, que debía ser un despliegue de poder al estilo dictador, terminó pareciendo un desfile del pueblo. Soldados sonrientes, música festiva y gradas vacías. Y eso no lo perdona. La congresista Mickey Sherrill lo ha explicado perfectamente. Este desfile es el reflejo de todo lo que está mal en la administración de Trump. Recuerden que él prometió eliminar los gastos innecesarios, recortar la grasa del presupuesto. Pero claro, eso nunca incluyó su propio ego. Pete Hegseth no solo no fue capaz de controlar el gasto, sino que se convirtió en un cómplice de este despilfarro millonario que terminó siendo un espectáculo bastante triste.
With all due respect, I'd like your nomination. When will we see it?
There has not a single admiral or any military official has turned down a position that's been
So when will we see
provided.
your nominee for the Chief of Naval Operations?
In due time, for all the right reasons.
Again, I think we've seen the managerial incompetence. Okay, let's move on to budgetary incompetence. You missed the deadline to submit a draft defense budget to Congress, which makes it impossible for us to complete our work on the NDAA or appropriations, and makes it more likely you'll receive delays in funding you need for new acquisitions, programs, and other priorities. Additionally, you're blowing money on poorly conceived operations and vanity projects for President Trump. Retrofitting the Qatari jet to serve as Air Force One will cost about $400 million. The parade in D.C. this weekend will cost upwards of $40 million. Your bombing campaign in Yemen cost about $1 billion, and a week later they were having missile strikes in Israel. Your operations in L.A. will cost tens of millions of dollars, and you claim to be cutting costs at the Pentagon, but all I see are wasted dollars better spent addressing our most pressing threats like China. So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
Ma'am, I would just say your list left off securing the southern border.
So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
We make trade-offs every day, and I would imagine what we want to spend on is quite different than what the previous administration did.
Well, I think
We
the
made
American-
those changes quickly, and they're reflected in this budget, and we're very proud of them.
I think the American people can see why I'm so concerned about this incompetence. Thank you, and I yield back.
Y por si fuese poco, el congresista Jason Cruz reveló que costó reparar las calles de Washington, que recordemos fueron dañadas por los tanques. O sea, ni siquiera fue un desfile simbólico, fue un capricho que arruinó infraestructura y vació bolsillos públicos. Todo para alimentar la vanidad de Trump.
Let's just explain what's happening here. Right, so we're going to take 6,000 soldiers away from their family, away from their training. These folks are people that deploy all the time. We're going to take tanks from Texas, put them on rail cars and ship them to Washington, D.C. We're going to line the streets of Washington, D.C. with metal plates so those tanks don't rip it up, right? All for the cost of over $50 million, right? That is wrong. It takes soldiers away from their families, away from their mission. It wastes taxpayer dollars. I just don't have time for parades.
Claramente la historia no termina ahí. Según el periodista Michael Wolff, Trump llamó por teléfono a Pete Hegseth y lo regañó a gritos. No por el dinero tirado a la basura, no por las gradas vacías, no por haber puesto en ridículo al ejército. No, amigos, lo regañó porque los soldados se veían demasiado felices. Literalmente, dijo que se estaban divirtiendo, que no mostraban una cara militar, que el tono era demasiado amistoso. O sea que, al parecer, Trump quería que su cumpleaños tenga una imagen de poder, de intimidación. Y lo que obtuvo fue una pasarela de soldados marchando fuera de ritmo, sin ganas, mientras el clima gris acompañaba su ego herido. Claro que las redes no lo perdonaron, y gente diciendo que los soldados no querían estar ahí, que marchaban desincronizados, que todo parecía una mala broma, y bueno, Trump furioso porque no se sintió como un dictador supremo. Esto no es una excepción, es la norma en la administración de Trump. Gastar sin sentido, derrochar millones y siempre poner su imagen por encima de cualquier otra prioridad. Tal y como lo dijo Elizabeth Warren, el dinero solo es un problema para Trump cuando no se gasta en él o en los multimillonarios de su círculo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to ask about the Republican big, beautiful bill, which will knock about 16 million people off their health care coverage and cut programs that keep groceries cheaper for millions of families in order to try to pay for about $4 trillion in tax giveaways that are mostly going to be sucked up by millionaires, billionaires, and wealthy corporations. So, Mr. Besson, Secretary Besson, I'd like to start with a very simple question. Will this bill increase or decrease the deficit?
They're varying scoring on that, Senator Warren.
You're the Secretary of the Treasury, so I'm asking you. What is your view? Will this bill increase or decrease the deficit?
It is my view that over the 10-year window, it will decrease.
You know, do you have anybody who agrees with you on this?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask my question.
Okay.
Every credible independent expert agrees that Trump and the Republicans' big, beautiful bill would add trillions of dollars to the national debt and would not even come close to paying for itself. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the Penn-Wharton budget model, and the Yale Budget Lab all agree on this, and they're looking at 10-year windows, thank you. So do the Conservative Tax Foundation and Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, conservative groups. Even Elon Musk and the Wall Street Journal are criticizing the bill for ballooning the national debt. The only people who are saying publicly that it's not going to add to the national debt are you, Donald Trump, the Republicans in Congress. Do you have an independent group that has put forward numbers that disagrees with all of these conservative groups and disagrees with the Wall Street Journal on this?
Well, Senator, interesting to see you aligned with Elon Musk, but if I add...
You're no more shocked than I am.
If we want to take the full congressional budget scoring, they predict, and I don't agree with their methodology, they predict a $2.4 trillion deficit. But
okay, so the answer to the question is yes.
No, but may I finish? They include but they've also scored $2.8 trillion in tariff income. So even in Washington, D.C. math,
Okay, so-
in Washington, D.C. math, that is a $400 billion surplus.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. This bill, you admit, will increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion, but you think there will be another bill and another set of agreements that somehow materialize, haven't materialized so far, don't have any statutory authority, but that will make up the difference. So the answer to the original question, will this bill increase or decrease the deficit? I think you just said it will increase. This bill increases the
No,
deficit.
I
Is
want
that
to
right?
use all the CBO scoring, and you can't take one without the other. I don't agree with the CBO.
One is the law that we are scoring, the bill that is in front of us. We don't have a tariff bill in front of us to score. Mr. Secretary, let me go on to the second question. You have said that government spending is, quote, out of control. You have also called government spending, quote, unsustainable. In fact, in the name of fiscal responsibility, you're working with the Republicans on this big, beautiful bill to pass the biggest cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act in American history. So, Mr. Secretary, help me understand here. Why is the national debt so very important that you're trying to kick 16 million people off their health insurance, but increasing the national debt doesn't seem to matter if you're cutting taxes for billionaires and billionaire corporations?
Well, first of all, a huge portion of this goes to family-owned businesses that are pass-through entities that are below that level, Senator, and I am sure you share my goals of Main Street prosperity.
You know, I'm glad to do tax cuts for people of modest means. The question I'm asking is, why does the deficit not matter to you? We're talking about knocking 16 million people off their health care, but it matters not, it does matter to you if we're knocking people off their health care, but not.
Well, first of all, that figure is overstated by 5.1 million. That is amount not attributable to provisions in this bill.
So you think it's okay just to knock 10 million people off?
Así que sí, amigos, mientras el mundo se quema, Donald Trump se indigna porque su desfile militar no se veía suficientemente autoritario. Y mientras tanto, la gente paga por su capricho. Esto no es un simple capricho excéntrico, ¿no?, de un líder. Es una muestra muy peligrosa de las prioridades retorcidas del autoritarismo frustrado, de una figura política que sigue arrastrando un país hacia el ridículo internacional. Y bueno, pues señores, junto con esto tenemos que tocar el tema del Medio Oriente, ¿no? Y es que Donald Trump tiene dos opciones en el Medio Oriente, y al parecer cualquiera de las dos es una que molestará a su base. Trump acaba de abandonar prematuramente la cumbre del G7 para atender esta crisis en el Medio Oriente. Publicó en Truth Social un llamado a evacuar Teherán, dejando entrever que algo muy serio podría estar por ocurrir. Pero amigos, lo más preocupante no solo es el conflicto en sí, sino la improvisación con la cual se están tomando estas decisiones que, como bien sabemos, tendrán consecuencias devastadoras para millones de personas y para su propio legado político. Escuchemos esta noticia.
President Trump is back in the White House this morning. He left the G7 meeting last night a day early to deal with the escalating conflict in the Middle East. An administration official also tells NBC News Trump has requested the National Security Council be prepared in the Situation Room. The White House announced his early departure from Canada just an hour after the president urged residents in Tehran to immediately evacuate. Writing on Truth Social, quote, Iran should have signed the deal I told them to sign. He was asked about that on Air Force One overnight.
What's the thinking on the call for Tehran to evacuate? Is there a threat or is there incoming? What was the thinking on the call to evacuate?
I want people to be safe. And that's always possible. A thing like that could happen. I just want people to be safe. Is there any new concern about U.S. troops or assets in the region at all today? Great people that know how to protect themselves. And when you say better, what's the... They'll come down so hard if they do anything to our people.
You know, Karen, some ominous signs. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but the president last night warning residents of Tehran to evacuate immediately. That's not an easy thing to do. It's chaos there. They're not even getting much guidance from their own government. They don't have the elaborate bunker system that the Israelis have. But you add on top of that, the president also announcing a meeting this morning of his top national security officials. Sounds like ominous signs for Iran, suggesting that perhaps the United States may become involved in this conflict. What can you tell us?
Well, you know, one thing we know about the president is he always thinks that there is a deal in here somewhere. But I think it's becoming pretty clear that he is about to face his biggest test as commander-in-chief and as the leader of a world power, and that is whether or not to get involved in this conflict. Whether, for instance, to give Israel the bunker-busting bombs that they would need, U.S. bombs, to really go after the Iran nuclear facilities, which are underground. And if he does that, that is going to not only be the end of, potentially be the beginning of a remaking of the Middle East, but it would also, I think, really deeply divide his own MAGA coalition.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about, Jonathan Martin. It seems to me the president has two choices as we move forward. One is to get involved and possibly help Israel bring about regime change in Iran. That, of course, there are opportunities there, but history has shown us in the Middle East there's a lot more opportunity for destabilization, but also a great divide inside the MAGA coalition with people like Tucker Carlson and others saying that it might spell the end of the Trump presidency. That's on one side. On the other side, you have traditional conservatives who have seen Iran as the epicenter of terror since 1979. And will Donald Trump take the blame for not finishing off the Ayatollah when he had a chance to do it in 2025? Well, you know, so either way he goes, he's going to upset people in his own base. Take us inside that debate in the Republican coalition.
Trump said it pretty clearly over the weekend. He said, I decide what America first means, which kind of reminds us of that great saying, I am the decider, that we heard from a previous president. The truth is, Joe, Trump doesn't have strong feelings about on Iran policy. Trump wants to be on the side of what's popular and what's going to make him look good. And I think, look, he was uncertain about the Israelis going in. I think Bibi knew that. I think Bibi was deeply concerned that Trump was gonna try to find some deal with the Iranians, and so Bibi went ahead with the attacks to preempt Trump doing precisely that deal. And that's why you saw the attacks launched last week. Trump, of course, says that the attacks were well done, good on the Israelis, because they were successful. But, Joe, you know, if it hadn't gone well, that first wave of attacks, Trump would have run like a scalded dog from Israel and from Netanyahu. But it's only because they go well that Trump's now on the side of go after the Iranians. But going forward, it's going to be a harder choice for Trump because, yes, there are going to be questions about what role the U.S. plays. Is it troops? Is it air support? Is it just our weapons that the Israelis are using? It's going to be hard for Trump to avoid those questions going forward. And by the way, I think part of the reason why he left early, the G7, was not to go spend 8 hours today in the sit room. That's not Donald Trump. He doesn't want to be forced to answer those questions from his contemporaries in the G7 hour after hour out there in the Canadian Rockies.
Yeah, and I've got to say, the challenges, the greatest challenges lie ahead for the president in making decisions, because it's one thing to sit back during the first and second strikes. It's quite another as chaos begins to break out in Tehran and perhaps in the entire region. Karen, politics, my gosh, we see it time and time again, how the changing of presidencies, where you have one president that loathes the prior president, or at least what the prior president did. I always, we can go back and look at Barack Obama, who wanted to define his presidency by not being Bush and Cheney, and yet he continued so many of their policies on the war on terror, especially. He upped drone attacks and found out he had to do a lot of things that he didn't want to do. You could go back to Bill Clinton criticizing George H.W. Bush on China, but then adopting basically George H.W. Bush's position on China. Here, you have Donald Trump being frustrated by the same two leaders that haunted Joe Biden for his last 2 years in office, Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin. And here Donald Trump finds himself in the same position with two obstinate leaders who don't care what the American president has to say, whether he is a Democrat or a Republican.
And also not really appreciating the irony that for all he has criticized Barack Obama for the Iran nuclear deal, here he is himself desperately seeking a negotiated solution with the Iranians.
Lo que acabamos de ver, amigos, es un ejemplo perfecto del caos disfrazado de liderazgo. Donald Trump no tiene un plan claro para Irán, no tiene una estrategia sólida. Lo único que tiene es el miedo de perder apoyo político. Fíjense en esto, amigos. Él sugiere que la evacuación de Teherán es por precaución, pero ni siquiera tiene una amenaza concreta, ¿no?, que justifique semejante mensaje. O sea, parece más una reacción impulsiva, ¿no?, que una decisión basada en inteligencia real, cosa que, pues, como bien sabemos, luego vino lo complicado, ¿no? Sugiere que si Irán hace algo, vendrá una respuesta devastadora. ¿Devastadora para quién? ¿Para Irán? ¿Para los lados estadounidenses? ¿Para la estabilidad global? Además, se muestra muy dispuesto, ¿no?, a entregarle a Israel bombas capaces de destruir estas instalaciones subterráneas en Irán. ¿Por qué? ¿Por querer verse bien? ¿Porque no quiere que lo critiquen por no haber terminado el trabajo contra el régimen iraní? Ojo, amigos, incluso dentro del movimiento MAGA existe una división gigante. O sea, mientras que los halcones neoconservadores quieren ver a Irán reducido en cenizas, hay figuras como por ejemplo Tucker Carlson, que ya advierten que una guerra podría destruir la presidencia de Trump. O sea, es decir, que si él ataca, lo critican; si no ataca, también. En otras palabras, estará acorralado por sus propias contradicciones. Y en el fondo, amigos, Donald Trump no tiene una postura ideológica real. Hay que ser sinceros. Él solo quiere estar del lado del que se vea bien en televisión, del que reciba aplausos. Por eso dejó el G7, no para estar en esta situación, sino para poder evitar preguntas incómodas por parte de otros líderes mundiales. Lo suyo no es gobernar, lo suyo es aparentar.
Let's bring in NBC's Monica Alba from the White House, international correspondent Matt Bradley from Tel Aviv, Israel. Also with us, PBS NewsHour co-anchor Jeff Bennett and Victor Cha from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you all for starting us off here. Monica, are any more details emerging about the president's decision to cut the G7 trip short and ready a Situation Room meeting?
Well, look, Anna, the official explanation was that he did need to return to Washington, according to his top White House aides, to deal with very important matters. Specifically, they later attributed that to, quote, what's going on in the Middle East. But the president overnight, as he was returning, landing here just before 5 a.m., was asked by reporters to elaborate on that. And he said he couldn't really share more specific information, but that he wanted to be monitoring it all, saying that Iran still had a chance to try to reach some kind of a, quote, peaceful outcome, that is what he's trying to still push for diplomatically, as challenging and difficult as that might be. But he didn't really offer more details on some of his other really significant comments and posts yesterday, where he warned the entire city of Tehran, more than 10 million people reside there, to evacuate. And all he said about that was that he just wanted to make sure people were, quote, safe. He also said, then refuted some reporting that's out there about the idea that he wanted to push for a complete ceasefire. What he's saying, again, is that he's still trying to get the parties back back to the table to discuss curbing Iran's nuclear capabilities, but he was cagey on whether that meant he's going to send his vice president or his top envoy, Steve Witkoff, to resume those conversations, to meet with Iranian officials. So there's still a lot up in the air here, Anna, and we don't even have a sense of a schedule for the president today. He did indicate he wanted to meet with his top national security advisors and officials here in the Situation Room. So that's something that we could likely see in the coming hours. But at this point, we don't have any other information about when we may see him or hear from him next.
Okay, so Matt, it is day 5 of this fight. What more can you tell us about what's happening on the ground right now?
Yeah, well, it's been a surprising last night. I mean, it was quite a bit less terrifying than some of the previous nights when even inside these barricaded rooms that we see in almost every building in Israel, you could still hear, impacts outside. It was pretty frightening. But last night, and, we had 3 sirens. We went into these shelters, and then, we heard about after 10 or 15 minutes that it was okay to go. And then, according to the IDF today, last night was the lightest Iranian assault on Israel since this all began with Israel's attacks against Iran on Friday morning. So we even heard from the Ministry of Health here in Israel. They said,
Ahora sé quién habrá alguien que me diga, Trump está defendiendo a Israel, no o proyectando fuerza, pero seamos sinceros, señores, proyectar fuerza no es sinónimo de actuar sin rumbo. La historia nos ha demostrado que cada intervención militar en el Medio Oriente, sin un plan claro, termina muy mal. ¿Acaso ya olvidaron Irak, Afganistán, Libia? ¿Y ahora quieren sumar Irán a la lista? ¿Solo para que Trump no quede como débil ante su base de seguidores? Está jugando con fuego, no por estrategia, no por seguridad nacional, sino por puro cálculo político. El precio, sin duda, podría ser altísimo. Una guerra en Irán no solo es un desastre humanitario, también podría fracturar su base política, podría acabar prácticamente con su carrera política, hundir a Estados Unidos en un nuevo conflicto sin salida. Pero bueno, señores, ¿qué opinan ustedes sobre este tema? ¿Creen que Trump realmente quiere evitar una guerra o simplemente quiere salvar su imagen? Los invito a que me dejen sus comentarios, sus opiniones. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, dale like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.